And welcome to the Daily Signal Live. I am Genevieve Wood, senior contributor with the Daily Signal. We got a great lineup for you today. We're going to talk about the issue immigration. It's been a hot topic, what's happening on the border, but there are a lot of things contributing to the crisis that's building there. And we've got three folks at the Heritage Foundation who are very adequately equipped to talk about this issue. They've been following it for some time. So let me bring them in and introduce them to you first. First is our Vice President for Defense and Foreign Policy Studies, Jim Carafano. Jim, thank you for joining us.
Hi.
We also have Anna Quintana, who is a research associate focusing primarily on Latin America and what's happening there. And we're very delighted that you're going to be with us as well today.
Hello.
And also Mike Gonzalez. Mike is senior fellow with the Heritage Foundation, and he's also the author of a forthcoming book, which I think will play into this topic somewhat. It's called A Race for the Future, How Conservatives Can Break the Liberal Monopoly on Hispanic Americans. Mike, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure to be here. Hi, Genevieve.
So let's start up first of all, and Jim, let me begin with you and talking about just kind of where things stand today. I mean, I think many people watching obviously know this is an issue that's been building now for weeks and months, but what is the current crisis that where do we stand today?
Yeah, that's a great question. To put it in perspective, the numbers of people that were unlawfully present in the United States, which were several million, and the number of people that were apprehended, that number started to go down about 2008, and the number of people that were apprehended at the border started to go up. So that decline continued until very recently, and now we've actually see the trend reverse. That actually the unlawful population in the United States is growing, and the number of people that are trying to breach the border is increasing. And the particular crisis relates to really unaccompanied minors at the border. So last year, Health and Human Services said they had about 2,000 young people that were apprehended at the border that were taken into custody. The number is in the tens of thousands now, over 50,000. So the scale of the number of unaccompanied minors that's come at the border in the last several months is just staggering.
Now, very recently, as of just this week, President Obama came forward and has asked Congress to give him more money, almost $4 trillion, to deal with this particular issue. How do you think that money ought, first of all, do you think Congress should give him the money, and how do you think it ought to be spent if it's going to truly be effective?
Well, you know, just be very frank, I mean, the president's asking for about $3.8 billion in emergency spending, and that literally is the president asking for money so he could pretend that he's doing something, but he's really not. Virtually none of that money actually goes to securing the border. A lot of it will go to things, for example, like hire immigration lawyers. It takes 2 years from beginning to end to get an immigration judge on the bench. So there's almost nothing emergency about this emergency spending. And you have to remember, Congress is writing the budget right now. So if you need money for an appropriation, just put it in the appropriation. So this really is more about theatrics rather than the president really desperately needing money to handle the problem.
Anna, let me ask you about this. One thing that people have focused on, obviously we've heard a lot about the fact that the reason so many people have been coming in the past year and 2 years is because they believe if they get into the United States, they're going to be able to stay. We know that many of these people are coming from Central America, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador. But you would also argue that there's a lot at stake here when it comes to our foreign policy and how we've been dealing with these countries in Central America that's also contributing to what we see here.
I think it's important to note that in the past few years, you're seeing a trend. It's not so much Mexicans that are coming over to the United States, it's more individuals from Central America. And like in this recent case, I think it's estimated that 75% of the unlawful border crossers are coming from Central America, mainly from Honduras. And I don't think that it should be that it's a coincidence that Honduras is also the murder capital of the world, and Honduras is also the country that since 2009 you're seeing significant cuts in security assistance spending. We're putting these, just this administration has put these just incredibly burdensome restrictions on security assistance to help them combat the very thing that we find to be a threat to the U.S., and that's counter-narcotics, that's the gangs, that's the endemic violence, and it's extremely counterproductive how this administration has been dealing with it.
And why have they? But first of all, we've had now members of Congress saying, well, we should be cutting aid to all of these countries, and they don't step up and do what they need to do. But you're saying that's already what we have been doing in the case of Honduras.
Well, yeah, we have been cutting aid, and I think it's it's a bit of a misconception that foreign assistance is all food aid and cash grants. A significant part is security assistance. And what I think that members of Congress will find troublesome is the trend that this administration, that the Obama administration has had in deviating away from security assistance and towards development and towards economic development programs. You cannot have successful economic programs. These programs will not be, they really won't go anywhere. You won't have economic prosperity without having safe and secure cities. It's absolutely impossible.
So when you look at something like Honduras, let me ask you this: why do you think the administration has not been more active in this part of the world, or what do you think are the key missteps they've made that have contributed to the kind of the lack of stability there, to the extent you can have real stability, that you think is causing or contributing to this issue, this problem?
We got to look back at what happened in 2009. Then at that time, their current president, Mel Zelaya, who was taken out, there was a constitutional removal of his presidency. The Obama administration was quick to call it a military coup, despite the fact that there was overwhelming support from the country's Supreme Court, that it was totally in accordance to Honduras's constitution. We called it a military coup. And following designating a country having had a military coup, obviously significant amounts of foreign assistance was cut. And since then, there's always, despite the fact that the country has had successful elections, they've always found a way of putting these same like withholding requirements in place, whether it be for human rights violations or whatever it is, whatever seems to be politically convenient for them, that's what's in place. And I've been told that this year they want to elevate now withholding requirements on counter narcotics programming from 35% to 50%.
Wow. Mike Gonzalez, let me bring you in on this. Earlier today we were chatting, and I talked about the fact that the current commander of the U.S. Southern Command, General John Kelly, has said this is a real crisis on the border. He's very concerned about some of the things that Anna was talking about. What's your take on the foreign policy side of this?
Well, let me add something to what Anna just said, because I think it's really important. The Honduran crisis was one of the first foreign policy crises that the Obama administration dealt with, the new Obama administration, as it came in 2009, and we can clearly say that it failed it, and Hillary Clinton failed it as a Secretary of State. She ordered her ambassador there to be very activist in calling this a military coup and cutting off aid. The Hondurans had acted completely legally, and we cut off our best friends incited with Chavez and the Castros and everyone else that's on the left in Latin America. We have done the same thing in Guatemala. We have done the same thing in El Salvador, the three countries in the so-called Northern Triangle that are sending the lion's share of these kids here. And by the way, the amount of money that the president has requested would amount to about $80,000 per kid. So we can get a sense of what Jim Carafano was talking about. Now, I think the comments that the commander made are apt in the sense that Latin America is beset with a very big problem with narco traffickers. We haven't dealt correctly with Venezuela, which is one of the transshipment points. We haven't dealt with Cuba. We haven't dealt with Central America, and when we have done the wrong thing. So I think that you can feel this. I've been in San Pedro Sula in Honduras, and it really is one of the most dangerous cities in the world, and you feel it. When Ana says that Honduras is the murder capital of the world, it's not just that. It's that Honduras is not only #1, but it has double the murders of #2. Honduras has 92 murders per 100,000 inhabitants. We are very high in the OECD, and we have 5. Caracas is also a very dangerous city. But even looking down in the southern cone at Sao Paulo and Buenos Aires, they're very dangerous cities as well. So yes, this is approaching a very problematic situation for Latin America, and America should take this very seriously.
Jim, let me ask you, I mean, from a national security standpoint, I mean, when I was on the border a couple of weeks ago, I talked to several of the border agents there, folks at the Texas Department of Public Safety, and they said, their concern was twofold. One, that yes, they were having to put some resources, obviously, to dealing with the children coming across, the families coming across, and that was taking their eye off the drug cartel at times and some of those folks coming over. But they also said, look, people from over 140 different countries have crossed this border in the last year. Some of them are from places like Pakistan, Saudi Arabia. They're not all from Central and Latin America. And they said, you know, some of these are very bad guys that could be coming in for other purposes beyond just wanting to experience the American dream. How much of a concern should our southern border be in terms of terrorist threats?
Well, I mean, you know, realistically, we probably have as many people on a terrorist watch list that show up at the Canadian border as show up at the Mexican border. I hear these national security concerns about transnational terrorist travel. The reality is terrorists travel through lots of different means, through lots of different venues. You stop the terrorist pipeline. You don't sit around and try to catch them at the border. The number one issue here, the number one national security issue, really is the cartels and the gangs, because they basically are creating ungoverned spaces. This is well over a $40 billion a year industry. I mean, this was the only industry in North America that didn't take a hit of recession. They move people and money north. They move guns. They move people and drugs north. They move money and guns south. And it's not just destabilizing to the United States, but then they've opened up pipelines to Western Europe and into North Africa as well. So these cartels are a huge, huge national security problem. And the guys you talk to, same guys I talk to when I go to the border. I've been going to the border for over 10 years now. I thought the border with North Korea was dangerous. These things are a distraction. So when President Obama says we're going to grant an amnesty, we always see a surge of traffic at the border. And the reality is if you're a CBP agent, if you're an ICE agent, if you're a local law enforcement, if you're a county sheriff, you have to stop what you're doing. You have to stop tracing the drug trafficker. You have to stop chasing the people who are committing crimes along the border, and you have to go and round up these people. So this policy that the president, it's not just about a crisis of numbers are growing at the border. It's actually exacerbating the national security crisis, because the people working on the border at the state and federal and local level, they can't focus on the people that are coming here to hurt us. And that is a real problem.
Yeah, and Anna, some of these folks that Jim just talked about, the gangs, the drug cartels, I mean, they are, I know you have studied them well, and they actually have cells now in the United States. Is that right?
Well, yeah, they've been in the United States since that's actually where they originated. Like during the civil wars of the 70s and 80s of El Salvador, Guatemala, and Nicaragua, they originated in the streets of LA, and then we deported them back, and they proliferated when they went back to their countries. But I think we should really focus on what exactly is fueling and funding these guys, and that's the drug trafficking trade. And the fact is, our defense cuts have really contributed to the fact that we are not able to interdict as much drugs as we used to be before, and that's what's funding these guys. Honduras alone is the transshipment point for 79% of all drugs coming from South America to the United States. It's much more difficult and much more violent to break up, to stop drugs once they're coming across the border, rather than doing it from further down south. Bulk shipments, maritime shipments. General Kelly said exactly like he said, that this is an existential. He considers this to be an existential threat, which I take a little bit of an issue with that, and I'll tell you why later. But I think what he focused on a lot in his posture statement earlier this year is the diminished capacity that Southcom has now to interdict drugs, and the fact that they've had to shut down so many joint military operations with partners down in Latin America like Colombia and Mexico because of defense budget cuts.
And I know that in some cases, I mean, even when it comes to, is it Honduras that we cut off the funding so that the planes they have that help fight this war, they're not able to fix and fly?
Well, yeah, it's we didn't cut the planes off. We were blocking Honduras from repairing a fleet of Cold War era F-5 jet fighters. Israel was supposed to service them, but Congress got involved and didn't allow that. And this was just a recent issue. It's from the cuts that were made in 2009 until early on. I know the numbers before were around, I think Honduras was like the transshipment point for about 40% of northern bound drugs, and it's gone up in about 5-6 years to 79. Some estimate even 85% of all drugs coming from South America going north. And the fact is, the Honduran military and the national police, they do not have the capacity to govern they're empty spaces along the Caribbean coastline, and they don't have the capacity, they don't have the assets to really to secure them.
Sorry. Yeah, Jim, go ahead.
No, because I wanted to ask Anna a question, because part of the reason why we're seeing the growth in other countries is because the United States had just done such a great job in Colombia.
Mm-hmm.
And so people talk about foreign assistance and how it's a waste. You know, Colombia is a country where we went in because it was in our national interest.
Mm-hmm.
We worked with that country. Not only did their security situation improve, their economy has greatly improved. We now have a free trade agreement with Colombia. Mm-hmm. But the bad guys have got to go somewhere.
Exactly.
And so I think the bad guys are moving, but Colombia to me is a case study of how when you do it right, you can have good outcomes. And I just really appreciate if Anna commented on that.
Go ahead, Anna.
No, definitely. Colombia, in just 15 years, Colombia went from failed state to a country that is now a military exporter throughout Latin America. Colombia is able to do what the United States, because of budget cuts, cannot do. They train with the Honduran military, they train with the Guatemalan military, with the Salvadoran military, and they're taking our place, which is a great thing, which is what you want in a partner country. And if you look at Colombia's economy, like Jim said, we now have a free trade agreement that we benefit greatly from. Colombia is now the leader of the Pacific Alliance, which is a group of Pacific countries that they completely support free trade and economic freedom throughout the region, and that's what you want to see. That's the desirable outcome in foreign assistance when you do it right.
By the way, that's a very good example of how it works when it works well. And that was President Bush working with a very good ally of the U.S., President Álvaro Uribe in Colombia, a guy who believed in our values, who sided with America, who was our friend. In the Obama administration seems to do the opposite. Its instinct it still has the Che Guevara instinct of their college days, is to side with the left in Latin America, which has never liked us. So yet you see the dichotomy of Bush working well with Uribe and Colombia becoming a success, and Obama visiting El Salvador, giving the previous president Funes, who's also the same party as the president who's there now, some support, whereas his party, the FMLN, is completely tied to the drug traffickers. So you have the two examples, what works and what doesn't.
Let me shift gears here just a little bit, guys, and talk about, so obviously it's a more complicated issue than I think many people have given it credit for. There's a tendency just to focus on the border and what's happening immediately and not realize there's a lot of things that have probably fueled this over time, and there's going to take there's going to be more than one step that's actually needed to get us back on the right track. Jim, when you look at the situation as it is today, if you were the president, if you were the commander-in-chief, what would you do to turn it around, to stop the flow, and get us back to a place where we can start focusing on the long term of our immigration system and the right foreign policy process?
Yeah, I would get myself a time machine, and I go back to, no, seriously, and I go back to like 2008, because if you go back to 2008, all the trend lines were going in the right direction. The numbers were going down. The relations that we had were strong. We were building capacity in countries like Panama and Colombia. We were building free trade agreements, and all that just dead stopped. And then we lapsed back to this 2007 debate about amnesty. Yeah. And we basically said we can't do anything about immigration. We can't do anything about free trade. We can't do anything about visa reform. We can't do anything about anything until we have an amnesty bill. And the result of that, really, you start to see that really turn around in 2012. And that has us back in the situation that we have now. It's actually a very simple formula. You do responsible things on your border to show that you control and you have sovereignty at your own border. You enforce your laws internally so they have credibility. You work on the legal system and you create legal venues to get employers the employees they need when they need them to grow jobs and grow the economy. And then you work with partners in Latin America, doing things not because you're a nice guy, but because you're in your interest, that build security capacity, that build new markets, and that spread freedom and democracy. And when you do all those things consistently over time, you create a hemisphere where it's safe and people don't feel they have to run away from their problems. When you don't do those, you see that now. And this, I think, is just a really important point. As upset as people are about the tens of thousands at the borders now, that's actually a tiny glimpse of what would happen if we'd actually passed the amnesty bill that President Obama wanted. I mean, we've got a paper on our website that said that compares that bill to Obamacare, because it looks at all the things that we didn't talk about in the amnesty debate. We didn't talk about what's this going to cost to process all these people. What are you going to do about the waves of other people that follow them? And the costs are staggering. The amount of government that you have to add is staggering. The benefit for the economy is non-existent, and the security crises that you create are exacerbated. You're emptying these countries out of the people that are productive and want to work there. You're leaving behind a security vacuum that's going to be filled by cartels. It's going to be filled by gangs. It's going to be filled like people like Hamas and Hezbollah and other groups that have terrorist networks throughout Latin America. We are on a very, very dangerous course here, and the answer is not full steam ahead. The answer is full steam backwards.
But how do you go full steam backwards with the folks that are now here today? I mean, you've got people coming forward and say, well, look, we have this law that says you can't send people back to the Central American countries just immediately. We've got to go through a judicial process. And by the way, that was George Bush who signed that. How do you answer that allegation that's now coming from the Obama administration?
Yeah, so you have to, if you're talking about the sending minors back to their home country, which you have to really understand what the law says. So in 2008, if you think about it, when you send somebody back to their country, when they get back, it's kind of their problem. A child falls in a different category, because you wouldn't, for example, if a human smuggler had taken a child, or a trafficker had taken that child and brought them here, what you wouldn't want to do is just throw that child back into that country where that person's just going to pick them up and throw them back in the pipeline again. Just like when we put a child on an airplane, we don't put them on an airplane unless we're sure there's an adult that's going to meet them at the other end and take care of them. So when you send a child home, you want to make sure that they're going to be, at some degree of safety and security. So you do handle that differently. So we wrote a law in 2008, which basically said for non-contiguous countries, that means outside of Mexico, you can't do what's called expedited return, which is essentially you can't just take them and send them out. You have to put them in a safe and secure environment and then go through a legal process. Now, that might have made sense when you looked at the number of people that were unlawfully coming into the country were overwhelmingly from Mexico, and we could just send them back to Mexico. And when you had numbers that were in the hundreds and thousands. But when you have an environment created like President Obama, where you're actually attracting children to risk their lives, to risk their safety, to risk getting raped, murdered, robbed, catching horrible diseases, coming by the tens of thousands, that law really doesn't make sense. So we do need to partner with these countries so we can get the children back to those countries in a safe and secure manner as quickly as possible. Fixing the law is going to help with that, but going back and blaming a 2008 law, which maybe was not a very smart law, I granted. It was done with the intent of combating human trafficking. I get that, but fixing that law is not the root of the problem. The root of the problem is very clearly this administration's policies, which doesn't enforce the law internally, which proclaims that amnesty is a really good idea, which offers minors who are here amnesty, suggesting that others should come, and that is creating the numbers that are really creating the problem.
Yeah, I mean, as we know, the surge did not start in 2008 and 2009 and 2010. It really started post-2012, and we've really seen it now in 13 and 14. Mike Gonzalez, I know that there was a poll out earlier today that was kind of looking at how the public is looking at this issue, and I found it interesting that over a third, I think, of Hispanic Americans actually are blaming this administration for what they're seeing on the border, and they don't like what they're seeing on the border.
Right, that was a very good report by Neil Monroe of the Daily Caller, and if you read his report, it's actually higher than that, because it's about 45% of Hispanics that were polled in this Investors Business Daily poll blame the Obama administration, at least somewhat, for the surge and in these kids. And by the way, as Jim said, I mean, the intellectual dishonesty of blaming Bush again. It seems that everything gets blamed on Bush. So blaming this Bush law for this surge that we're seeing this year, I have called people in Central America. I talked to someone in Guatemala City, and he told me the coyote networks were going to the families this year, not last year, not the year before, and saying, hand your kids over because they'll receive sanctuary in the United States this year if you give them to us. Mm-hmm. So it has nothing to do with a law that was passed 2008, which admittedly is making it harder to repatriate the children, which was very well intentioned probably when it was passed at the time. So yeah, I mean, I think that I've seen Univision. Univision has clearly Jorge Ramos has clearly reported that these kids are coming because they are hearing from the White House that they will be able to stay. And whether the White House may say, well, but the amnesty we're offering the kids is only for those who arrived before 2007, yeah, perhaps, but that's not the message that is getting across to Central America. Their message is very muddled, as we saw with the Secretary of Homeland Security, Jay Johnson, on Meet the Press on Sunday.
Mike, your book coming out, it's called A Race for the Future, How Conservatives Can Break the Liberal Monopoly on Hispanic Americans. You don't really hit on the immigration issue there. You really, this is a kind of a history, if you will, of looking at the history of folks coming from that part of the world to America, their assimilation into America. As you have studied that and walked through all of it, what's your biggest concern with what we're seeing today and how that may impact those communities and the relationships that they've built here in America?
You know, thank you for mentioning my book. By the way, it's on Amazon already for pre-order, A Race for the Future. I think that this could turn into something major that will become these kids, if they're allowed to stay, obviously, they're many tens of thousands right now. It could affect the makeup of the Central American population here. But I think it will be just a blip. We have been seeing these things from the beginning. What I found in researching my book, and what I know, being of Cuban descent myself, is that these groups can be very different from one another. Central Americans really do understand the context of what is happening in the Northern Triangle much more than somebody who is from another group would be able to. So I think that if it affects them, we will know in the future, depending on how large this wave is, whether it affects the makeup of Central Americans here in this country. It's hard to ascertain at the moment.
Let me, we'll wrap with just asking you all the same kind of final question. Based on where we are today, what you've seen the administration do thus far, both in the current crisis but also leading up to it, what should those who are out there, citizen activists, those who are very concerned about what's happening, what should they be encouraging their representatives, whether it's their member of Congress, whether it's their governor, what should they be encouraging their lawmakers to do and to say on this matter? And Jim, I guess I'll start with you.
Yeah, thanks. I think this raises a really important point because we're talking about dumping people in the system. Another part of the problem is you're dumping people in a system where if you come in at the bottom, our system is keeping you at the bottom, and that raises two other really critical issues, which is you want to write off the bottom is welfare reform and education reform, because we want people to be successful and have opportunity to be part of the American dream. So as frustrated as I get about them not dealing with the border issue, I'm equally just frustrated beyond belief with the lack of education reform to give people opportunity and choice to advance, and with the lack of welfare reform that encourages people to get into the workplace and contribute to it. So I think if you're out there and you want to talk about immigration, I think that's great. But I'd hope you'd be just as passionate about education reform and about welfare reform as well.
Very, very good points. Anna, what would you be advising folks, especially obviously coming from the foreign policy angle?
Well, I always recommend that look beyond the issue of border security and look beyond our immigration policies. Granted, while that is definitely a contributory factor, we need to look at what exactly are the conditions that are driving people over here and what is it that this administration has done and is proposing to do. In this $3.8 billion budget, they're asking for like an outrageous $300 million to continue with the same failed economic development policies. So essentially, they just want to continue dumping money into these programs that they themselves have shown have not worked. You cannot expect businesses to thrive. You cannot expect food aid to go anywhere if you don't have safe and secure cities.
Thank you. And Mike, final comment.
I think Jim brings up a very good point. We can't just have a national debate on these crises, go from crisis to crisis to crisis. We have to have a debate on the fundamentals. One of the problems that is holding some of the Hispanic groups back is a very high out-of-wedlock rate, at 53% for all Hispanic groups now. Imagine these kids who come in now without family, without a mom and a dad. Kids need a mom and a dad at home in order to do well in school. do well later, get into college, do well in the workplace. So yes, let's debate education. Let's debate how do we help the family, how do we help communities. Let's concentrate, as I try to do in my book, on the real issues.
Well, as always, many public policy issues, while there are some simple solutions, they are also more complicated than I think a lot of times they get credit for when they play out on the cable news networks and the like. And so I want to say thank you to Jim and to Anna and to Mike for helping shed a little more depth into this issue, and encourage everybody who's watching. There is a lot on the heritage.org website. You can see the research papers by all the folks here. They also write regularly for the Daily Signal, both commentary and opinion pieces. So I'd encourage you to check out both dailysignal.com and heritage.org to find their particular research and materials. I think you'll find it very helpful. And of course, be looking forward for Mike's book. It's not out yet, but you can place an early order on Amazon. It's called A Race for the Future. Guys, thanks very much.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.